Hello and welcome to the second part of my tuning guide. Today we're going to be discussing how to reduce oversteer. Now this is going to be much more complicated than my first video, which was removing understeer. But the best way I'm going to do this is, at first I'm just going to show you a general base tune of sort of a typical tune of how to reduce oversteer. But because it varies so much between the different classes and the different types of cars, I'm going to show you quite a few different examples of cars and how I've tuned them differently to reduce that oversteer. Okay, let's use the Mercury Cougar in B class, which of course is rear wheel drive, as an example. Tyre pressures, I've got them the same, but like I said in the previous video, take it for a test drive, look at the telemetry, look at the pressures, look at the temperatures and make the necessary adjustments. The camber and toe settings, which we'll move on to in a minute, camber I pretty much leave the same as it is. The toe though, now if you want to reduce oversteer, you would increase the rear towards in. Again, don't go above minus 0.3, but I leave that at 0.1. Anti-roll bars, notice how this is opposite to the understeer video. The front is stiffer than the rear, same with the springs, same with the rebound and the bump as well, complete opposite of my understeer video. Downforce, now notice I've got more on the rear than the front. This is ideally what you want, but not exclusively, I'll explain. But the setting I've just done there, I've got 0 at the front and maximum on the rear. Never ever do that. You never ever want that as a setting, and I'll show the simple reason being is because you just won't get the car to turn in, and there's nothing to be gained from having that setting. So that's where it does differ from my understeer video. Braking, well, you could have the brakes towards the rear if you want to trail brake. The differential, now I've got it at 100, but if you wish to reduce oversteer, what you would do is decrease the acceleration and increase the deceleration, like I've just done there. But again, that's something, it just depends how much oversteer you're getting. So it's just a bit balancing that out and testing out some different settings. Let me begin with the E-Class, probably the best way to start, with the Jeep Willy. Now this is going to really confuse you, and again, like I said earlier, I shall do my best to explain why, because it really does vary so much on what car and class that you're in. So now you might think, what on earth is going on here? We're tuning out oversteer and I've got 0 downforce on the rear. Now the reason is very simple. When you're in the lower classes like E and D class, adding horsepower to your car just costs so much PI that in actual fact you're better off using that PI for your handling and reducing your downforce. That's especially true on speed tracks. And I'm going to demonstrate actually around modern, so the difference that it can actually make just by your downforce settings alone. Right, let's put this to the test with going along the straight with maximum downforce on the rear and see what top speed we get on the straight. Okay, so it looks like about 102 miles per hour on the straight. So let's give this a try now and take all the downforce off on the rear. I well, probably worth pointing out that I didn't actually change the gear ratio, so obviously if you're taking the downforce off, you would have to put it final drive towards speed more to get the most out of no downforce. Worth pointing out something actually whilst I'm just reversing up here. You'll probably notice if you look at the gearing, I actually shift earlier than I don't redline it. Gearing is something I'm going to have to touch on another video. The reason why I'm shifting early is because I want to stay within the power band. So like I say, that's something I shall show you another time. Yes, I mean you can clearly see already we're up to 102, and like I say, if you had the change the final drive, probably get more top speed out of this with no downforce. Might not sound much, a few miles per hour, but in these lower classes it seems to make more of a difference than anything. So 105 that top speed was. Okay, let's have a look at the downforce settings. Now you may notice, because I've got no rear downforce, so I've got the front downforce just over halfway. The reason why I've done this is because if I had that downforce at max on the front, I would have a lot more oversteer. But I haven't got the front downforce at minimum because obviously I would have too much understeer. Now let me show you what I've done here. Because of the difference between the front and the rear downforce, I've increased. You can see the front is quite a bit stiffer than the rear. Same with the springs. And again with the rebound and bump. Now if I increase that to maximum on the front, you will notice that what I have to do is I have to increase the difference between the front anti-roll bars and the rear. I leave the springs as they are, but I also increase the difference again between the front rebound. I soften the bump a bit on the rear. And also, because obviously I'm going to have more oversteer, I reduce the acceleration and increase the deceleration. Now, what I'm doing here now is I'm showing you, if you have the front and rear aeros much closer together, then what you need to do is to have the, I'll just do the deceleration a minute. So what I do is the difference between the front and rear anti-roll bars and the springs and the rebounds and bumps are brought closer together. Now that is the general point of tuning oversteer really. The greater the difference between the front aero and the rear aero, the greater the difference you want with the front anti-roll bar, springs, bump stiffness, rebound, to compensate for that oversteer. Now, although I've shown you a low downforce setting for E-Class car, it isn't exclusively for E and D class. For example, there is some cars that you can run with very low rear downforce. For example, the modern GT in the Porsche or the Aston, if you have maximum rear downforce on tracks like Road America, Watkins Glen, you wouldn't stand much chance racing online because just people would have too much speed for you. Now, what I've shown you in that video before with the Jeep, the same would apply. You know, if you're running low rear downforce, you'll just stiffen the front and soften the rear. However, you know, there's some cars on this game that you just cannot do that with. For example, the rear wheel drive Volvo touring car, you have to have traction control on with that car. But if you run with zero downforce, the traction control would kick in that much, it would just absolutely kill your speed. So what I'm now going to do is show you how to tune a car that suffers terribly from oversteer, so I shall use the Volvo as a good example of this, because it's a very tricky car to tune, I personally find. Okay, so let's have a look at how you get rid of oversteer on, well, severe oversteer on a car like this, because yes, it's a very difficult car to tune, this one. I'll jump straight to the downforce settings though. If you notice, the rear has got quite a bit more downforce than the front. If you're still suffering from oversteer, you could reduce that front a bit, but like I say, I don't really like lowering that too much, but because it's, you'll see what I do with the, I increase the rear toe a bit. Now, despite having more rear downforce, I still have the front much stiffer than the rear. I do that with the springs, the anti-roll bars. I don't know why they're set like that, but I'll just increase the front rebound and soften the rear bumpness. Now, I also have the diff quite low on the acceleration and deceleration. Now, if you're finding with that sort of setup that you've got too much understeer, what you would do is you would reduce that difference between the front and the rear. You know, like I've always said, you have to take these cars for a test drive around the bends and use them by what I've shown you to get the balance between understeer and oversteer. But generally, a car like the Volvo, you would definitely have a lot more rear downforce, and you would also probably have to stiffen the front anti-roll bars and the springs relative to the rear. Let's do a summary of both my videos by using examples. Let's start with reducing understeer on a front wheel drive car. Maximum downforce on the front, 0 on rear, 100 0 on the diff. And then you want to slightly reduce the tyre pressure on the front compared to the rear. On the toe, you want the rear towards 0, soften the front anti-roll bars and stiffen the rear, same with the springs, and you do the same with the rebound and the bump stiffness. Okay, next example is how to reduce just slight oversteer on a rear wheel drive car. So this time I increase the rear towards in, slightly stiffen the springs and anti-roll bars compared to the rear, same with rebound and bump. And then have just slightly more rear aero relative to the front, and then you can slightly reduce the acceleration on the differential and increasing the deceleration. Alright, next example is a speed tune for a rear wheel drive car. So I increase the rear toe by a bit more towards in, increase the anti-roll bars to the front compared to the rear, same with the springs, same with the rebound and bump. Then remove the rear downforce. Then you can obviously reduce the acceleration and increase the deceleration. And then finally, how to reduce oversteer on a car that suffers from severe oversteer. So more rear downforce compared to the front. Stiffen the front rebound compared to the rear. Springs are okay. Stiffen those rear anti-roll bars a little bit. Yeah, and then just probably could always reduce a little bit of your tire pressure on the rear. Well, I hope this guide has been helpful in helping you reduce some oversteer. The next part that I'm going to be doing in my guide will be to how to build the car, and I shall show you many different examples of speed tunes, grip tunes, and you know which build to have for which track, and hope that also helps you. Thanks.